Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into all this crazy stuff happening over at MSNBC. Lots of changes. We're going to try to unpack all of it. We've got this really great New York Times piece with us today. Joy Reid's MSNBC show canceled in major shakeup. So, yeah, lots to dig into as we figure out what this means, not just for MSNBC, but for, well, the whole cable news world, really.
It really feels like a huge shift for MSNBC, not just some little changes here and there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Joy Reid out at 7 p.m. That's big news. The readout has been running for 5 years, and then all of a sudden, it's over. I'm kind of curious, do you think when Cesar Conde, back when he was in charge over at NBC Universal News Group, made this decision back in 2020 to give her the slot, did it really work out the way they thought it would?
You know, it's interesting because Reid was already a known name at MSNBC. She'd been doing Aim and Joy on the weekend since 2016. So she gets that bump to primetime, and now this. I think what really adds to the drama is that neither Reid nor MSNBC are saying anything about it publicly.
Yeah, it's like the silence itself is a whole other story, isn't it? But they're definitely not letting that primetime spot just sit empty. They've got this new trio taking over.
Yeah, and it's quite the group they put together for this panel show,
Yeah.
replacing the readout. You've got Simone Sanders-Townsend, Michael Steele, and Alicia Menendez. They were doing the weekend on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and now they're getting this primetime gig.
I gotta say, that is an interesting mix. You've got Sanders-Townsend, she's got that Democratic strategist background, and then Steele, former RNC chair, just in case anyone forgot, that's Republican National Committee, and then Menendez, the journalist, trying to make sense of it all. It's a big change from that one anchor format the readout had, right? Do you think this is MSNBC testing out, like, a whole new style, a new approach to programming?
I think it could be. This is Rebecca Cutler's first big move since she took over as MSNBC president, so she's making a statement. It's pretty clear that boosting ratings is the main goal here. I mean, they're ahead of CNN, sure, but Fox News is still the king, right?
Yeah.
This whole cable news world is so competitive, everyone is fighting for those viewers, and it looks like MSNBC is trying to step up its game.
It all comes down to who's watching, doesn't it? So how do you think these changes fit into that, into this larger media world, this bigger picture? Is this a sign of how things are going to change across the entire industry?
That's a really good question. The way people get their news is so different these days. People don't just tune in at the same time every day to see the same anchor anymore. It's all about getting news whenever you want. Streaming services, little bits and pieces online, that kind of thing. MSNBC, just like everyone else, is figuring out how to stay in the game when things are changing so fast.
So it's not just about competing with other cable news channels anymore. It's like they're battling the entire internet for our attention.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why trying new things, bringing in different voices becomes so important. Like, take this new 7 p.m. panel show. Do you think it's a way to get people who wouldn't normally watch a traditional news show to tune in? I mean, it's definitely a risk, but maybe it's a risk they have to take.
Makes sense. And it's not just the 7 p.m. slot getting a revamp, right?
Yeah.
Alex Wagner's 9 p.m. show, which she's been doing 4 days a week, that's changing too. Do you think that's where they'll really try the most daring things?
Well, the rumor mill is definitely buzzing, and the name that keeps popping up is Jen Psaki.
Wait, you mean like the Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary? Wow, that would be a huge move if it happens.
It would definitely get people talking, wouldn't it? And she's already on MSNBC sometimes doing some weekend shows and filling in here and there. But giving her a primetime slot, that's a whole different story. And it makes you think about this whole thing we see all the time now, people moving back and forth between politics and media.
It's like the natural career path these days, right? You go from crafting the message in the White House to analyzing it on cable news.
Exactly. And what about Alex Wagner? Where does this leave her? Looks like she'll be moving to an on-air correspondent role. Seems like MSNBC still wants her around. They value her reporting, just maybe not as a primetime anchor.
Interesting. So they're shifting things around with familiar faces, but I've also heard they might be bringing in some new people, some fresh voices from outside the network.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me. What do you know about these potential new additions?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Eugene Daniels. He's the Politico Playbook co-author, and Melissa Murray. She's a law professor at NYU. Both of them are, pretty big names in their fields, and they would definitely bring something new to MSNBC.
So to recap, we've got a major anchor leaving, a brand new panel show taking over primetime, Jen Psaki maybe stepping into the spotlight, and now these intriguing new faces. It's like they're rebuilding the whole network, piece by piece.
And then, just when you think things couldn't get any more complicated, you've got this corporate spinoff happening too. MSNBC is breaking away from the NBC Universal News Group. It's a real shakeup, that's for sure.
Well, hold on a second. We got to unpack that. So where's MSNBC going? I mean, who's going to be calling the shots?
They're going to be under Mark Lazarus. He's the guy who's running most of Comcast's other cable channels right now, like CNBC and USA Network. It's a pretty big shift, that's for sure.
So what does all this mean for MSNBC's future? Are they moving away from like hard news and trying to be more, I don't know, more entertaining?
It's tough to say right now. Lazarus was told about the programming changes, but it doesn't look like he was actually involved in making those decisions. So how much influence he'll really have on what MSNBC actually does, what kind of content they put out, that's still up in the air.
Man, this just keeps getting more and more interesting. We've got changes happening at the anchor level, changes in the types of shows they're doing, and now this big corporate restructuring. It's a bold move, that's for sure, and I think it's going to have a ripple effect on the whole media world. But we've only scratched the surface here, haven't we? We need to keep digging to really understand what these changes mean for MSNBC and for, the future of how we get our news.
It's kind of wild to think about all of this happening with the election coming up next year. MSNBC is changing everything right before this huge political moment.
It does make you think, right? Like maybe this isn't just about getting more viewers. Maybe they're trying to get ready for all the political fights that are going to happen during the election.
Well, that new 7 p.m. show with the panel and the mix of, Democrats and Republicans, maybe that means they're going for a more balanced approach. At least for that time slot, I mean. It'd be interesting to see if they do that for, like, all of their election coverage.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes me think about Jen Psaki. If she really does take over at 9 p.m., she's got all that experience working for Biden. So do you think that will affect how MSNBC covers the election? Like, could some people think the network is biased because of her?
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Some people might think her experience is a good thing, that she'll have insights other people don't. But others might be worried about bias, exactly like you said.
Yeah.
If she does get that job, she's going to have to walk a really fine line, trying to use her experience but also be fair to everyone.
It's a tough spot, for sure. And we can't forget about the people who already watch MSNBC. They've got to keep those viewers happy, but also try to bring in new ones. Do you think these new people they're talking about, like Eugene Daniels and Melissa Murray, could be the key to getting a wider audience?
I think bringing in Daniels and Murray is a really smart move. Daniels, he's so plugged into what's happening in D.C. with his work on Politico's playbook, so he might bring in those younger viewers, the ones who are really into politics. And Murray, she's a legal expert, so she brings this whole other perspective that's becoming more and more important in politics these days.
It's like they're realizing that the world of news is changing, and they need to change with it. Maybe they're trying to get those viewers who are really online, who get their news from all sorts of different places.
Exactly. And we can't ignore this corporate spin-off thing, MSNBC going under Mark Lazarus, who's in charge of channels that are more about entertainment. Maybe that could change their whole strategy.
So you think we might see them like mixing entertainment into their news coverage? Would that make their regular viewers mad, do you think?
It's a gamble, that's for sure. But these days, with so much competition out there, you got to take risks if you want to stand out. Maybe they'll try different kinds of shows or even bring in some famous people to try and get more viewers.
That would be a huge change from what they're doing now. But then again, maybe that's exactly what they need to do to survive in this crazy media world. Okay, so taking all of this into account, where do you think all of this is going for MSNBC? Do you think these changes will actually work?
Well, at the end of the day, cable news is all about ratings.
Yeah.
Right? It's too early to tell if people will actually like these changes and if it'll mean more people watching.
It's a tough world out there, for sure. Everyone's fighting for those viewers.
That's true. But what's interesting to me is that MSNBC is actually trying new things. They're willing to change. They're testing out new formats, bringing in new people, and even shaking up their whole corporate structure. Whether it'll actually work, I don't know, but it's a really interesting example of how media companies are trying to figure out this whole new world of news.
It's like they're saying, hey, we're not afraid to shake things up. We're going to try new things. And that's pretty cool to see in an industry that usually doesn't like to change much.
It's a big experiment, that's for sure. And what happens with MSNBC might tell us a lot about the future of cable news.
This deep dive has been, wow, it's been a lot. So many changes at MSNBC. But we're not done yet. We need to think about what this all means, not just for MSNBC, but for the whole media world. In the last part, we'll talk about that, about what these changes tell us, about how news is changing and what the future holds. So stick with us. We've been talking about all these changes at MSNBC, and it really feels like they're trying to reinvent themselves, you know? Like they know the world's changing and they got to change with it.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me is that what's happening at MSNBC isn't just some isolated thing. It's part of this much bigger trend we're seeing across the entire media landscape, you know?
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. What are some of the big changes that are driving not just what's going on at MSNBC, but everywhere?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is how people are getting their news. It's not like the old days anymore, where everyone sat down at the same time to watch the news on TV. Now it's all about, watching whenever you want, streaming services, getting little bits of news on your phone, all of that.
Yeah, it's like the news has to come to you now, right?
Yeah,
You don't have to go find it, it finds you.
exactly. And that means networks like MSNBC aren't just competing with other cable news channels anymore. They're competing with everything on the internet. Anyone with a smartphone can share news now.
So that's a whole different challenge for them, right? How do they stay relevant? How do people even know who to trust anymore when there's so much information out there?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And maybe that's where bringing in new voices and trying out new formats comes in, like we were talking about. Maybe that's how they're trying to reach a new audience, people who wouldn't normally watch cable news.
Yeah, people who are used to getting their news in all sorts of different ways, not just sitting down in front of the TV.
Exactly. But it's tricky, right? They have to figure out how to appeal to those new viewers without losing the people who already watch MSNBC.
And they have to do it all while still being, a trustworthy source of news.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, is this a turning point for cable news? Are we going to see more shakeups like this as everyone tries to figure out this new world?
I think it's very possible, yeah. We're already seeing other networks trying new things, experimenting, trying to figure out what works.
This is a time of a lot of change, but also a lot of uncertainty, huh?
Definitely.
And in all of this, I think the big question is, what does it mean for, for news itself? For how we stay informed about what's happening in the world? If people are moving away from the traditional sources of news, how do we make sure they're still getting good information? It feels kind of important,
It is. It's a really crucial point. And there isn't an easy answer. It takes, being able to think critically, to question what you see and hear, and to be a little skeptical. We can't just take everything at face value anymore. We have to think for ourselves.
It's like we all have to become our own fact checkers now, right?
In a way, yeah. But it's not just about individual responsibility either. We also need to support good journalism, to recognize that real reporting is valuable. We have to be aware of bias, and we need to support the organizations that are trying to tell the truth,
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into what's going on at MSNBC, what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they watch these changes happen, not just at MSNBC, but everywhere?
I think the big thing is this. The way we get our news is changing, and it's changing fast. The old rules don't really apply anymore. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to look at different sources of information. But always think about who's giving you that information and what their agenda might be.
And don't just sit there and absorb it, right? Engage with it, think about it, challenge it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an exciting time to be following the news, even if it's a little overwhelming sometimes.
It is. It's full of possibilities.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up here. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into all the craziness at MSNBC. This is a story that's still developing, so we'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.